I know this video is a lot longer than what you're used to. It's definitely longer than the 10 to 15 minute videos that you guys are probably used to on this channel. But I have a good reason for it. We're going to be talking about Rashard Lewis in this video. It's a very similar video to what I did with Alex Hoops about Chris Middleton. I'll put that video in the description below in the pinned comment if you want to check that one out. Just going to be talking about one of the more fun players historically that really doesn't get talked about as much as they probably should. And funny enough, we talked about Rashard Lewis a lot and how he compares to Chris Middleton in that video, so I decided, why not make a whole video talking about Rashard Lewis? I have Mat Issa with me. Matt, if you want to introduce yourself, just give us an idea of what you do. I would love if you could do that.
Yeah, Mat Issa, as Noah explained to you guys. I read about the NBA, I watch the NBA, I think about the NBA a lot, different websites like Forbes, SB Nation, Opt Analyst. In my free time, I love to watch like old games, learn more about kind of the history of the game. I guess I'm like an amateur historian in that way. And the reason he brought me on, I'm sure we'll talk about, is because I spent a lot of time last summer just studying Rashard Lewis's game and kind of becoming more and more familiar with that game. But yeah, so that's who I am, and I'm excited to be on here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you wrote a great article about Rashard Lewis that, funny enough, Alex referenced in the Chris Middleton video we did. So I'll put the link to that article in the description below, and the pinned comment as well. Also, make sure you follow Matt on Twitter. I'll put, again, everything that you need to know about Matt, I'll put in the description below and the pinned comment. But I want to start by asking you, what about Rashard Lewis's game stood out to you the most, like immediately when you started watching the tape?
Well, he's big, like he's a tall dude. He's like almost 7 feet tall, and that kind of jumps out at you immediately because you're like, wow, like this is a tall guy. And then you watch him, and he's got what I referenced in the article. It's like he's got like that Anthony Davis kind of maturation curve where he was not a short guy, but like relatively short in basketball terms, like his whole life. He's like 6'1", 6'2"-ish, like in high school and all that. And then 1 year in high school, can't remember which year it was, maybe sophomore, junior year, he grew like 7 or 8 inches. So like his whole life, he was kind of gearing up to play like a guard role. So he developed these guard skills. And yeah, he grew a bunch, and so he has the height now, and then he has all the guard skills that he learned when he was 6'1". And so I think what really jumps out at me is that combination of like kind of height, length, and then skill. I think that was like really the first thing that popped.
And one thing I noticed when I watched him play is like he's definitely like big for someone, definitely for someone with his skill set. But it wasn't, I didn't feel like it was like Anthony Davis, where Anthony Davis always, like, once he grew, it always, like, okay, this is a big. This is a power forward center type. Rashard, like, even though he's, like, probably nearly 7 feet tall, like, at the least, like, 6'10", he always had the build of somebody that played on the wing. Kind of like a Kevin Durant in a way. Definitely bigger than, like, Kevin Durant, like, bulk-wise, but, like, you know, somebody, when I watched him play, I was like, oh, you know, yeah, he's definitely tall, but he definitely belongs on the wing. And that reminds me a lot of like the top wing prospects we see now. And on top of that, when I watched him play, the first thing that stood out to me was this guy was drafted like 10 years too early.
You're talking about Rashard?
Yeah, Rashard. I'm like, oh, this guy was drafted like
so
10 years too early. But, you know, that's true. I mean, I think it applies to multiple things, not just his skill set. But I feel like you wanted to say something, so I'm gonna.
I have a theory. So I have a working theory going on here, right? And this is like kind of a running theme of this series where I studied Rashard Lewis in. That series I'm referring to is called Blazing the Trail. It's basically about a bunch of like guys who were ahead of their time, right? We're talking Rashard Lewis, Andrei Kirilenko, Chris Webber, yada yada, Reggie Miller. And so my theory is, and I was just talking, like I was just DMing, not DMing, I was replying to somebody on Twitter who was saying, because not to jump the gun here, I was comparing a modern player to Rashard Lewis, who isn't like an all-star caliber player. Remember, Rashard Lewis during his heyday was an all-star player. I was comparing them, and the guy goes like, "Yeah, but he'll never be like Rashard Lewis's level of impact." And the reason for that is because like we have a bunch of Rashard Lewises today. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So it's like Rashard Lewis actually kind of benefited from being ahead of his time. You know what I mean? So like back then, being like as skilled as he was you just gave him such a huge advantage impact wise because nobody was really like that. Whereas today, the guys that are most similar to Rashard Lewis are not really like all-star caliber players. They're like top 75 players, and that's like the same thing with like say like Andrei Kirilenko, right? Like look at the players today we compare to Andrei Kirilenko. They're like top 50, top 75 players, but during Kirilenko's time, he was like an all NBA type guy because his skill set was just ahead of the curve at the time. So I actually think Lewis was drafted at the perfect time, kind of to maximize and be ahead of his time. That's my
And when you bring that up, I agree. Like the more when you say, I'm like, oh, that definitely does make a lot of sense to believe that. Yeah, he kind of was like perfect because he was like able to blaze the path instead of just being like a guy among like guys with the skill set. I think ahead of his time, like he was drafted too like early. It also applies to like the start of his career because he came out. He was like prep to pro, entered the league as a teenager, and back then it was like those guys like they don't go high in the draft as much. Like he was drafted in 1998, which was like we're starting to see like guys like T-Mac, guys like Kobe, Kevin Durant, they went high, but like it still wasn't like, okay, are you gonna take a high school player super high? And he was like top 2 or 3 in his recruiting class, and he went in the second round. Whereas now, I feel like he would have been forced to go to college or Ignite or whatever. But also, the NBA is more willing to play teenagers now than they were back then. And I think like because of that, we're starting to see less cases of Rashard's rookie season. I'm looking at it right now, like 2.4 points. Like he played 20 games. He wasn't really in the rotation. But now I feel like those guys get more opportunity, and also I think the G League, like you can send players down now, they'll develop as well. But I do agree with your point that like this allowed him to kind of be this pioneer for like being the modern day wing.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. Like in terms of like he would have been able to kind of get started a little bit earlier. But like I'm talking when I the way I think about it, like when we're evaluating these players, I'm thinking about like his peak years. Like in his peak, he's like a top 25, top 30 kind of guy in the NBA, right? I don't think that like in today's game, if you just take that exact skill set and put it in, it's like that's like one thing. Like I'm okay. That's why I'm okay with like comparing. Like when we're doing like young guys, we're like, oh, I see. Like for example, Benedict Mathurin, right?
Yeah.
When I was like really scouting him earlier this year, I'm like, man, this guy like reminds me of Corey Maggette in a lot of ways, okay? And I'm not saying Corey Maggette at his peak, top 50 player in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying Benedict Mathurin's going to be a top 50 player. I'm saying like he just has like things that remind me of like, okay, so here's the thing with the NBA, the way that like the skill curve works, players keep getting more and more skilled. So like what made Corey Maggette a top 50 player in the NBA in 2005, whatever, would make him like a top 100 player in today's game or something like that. You know what I mean? So like when I make these comparisons, that's kind of where I'm getting at with that. Yeah.
And I also think that has a lot to do with like the game has changed so much. And while I do agree, it's like probably maybe like if he entered now, he like there are a lot of guys with Rashard Lewis like type skill sets now. But what would Rashard Lewis also look like if he got to grow up, playing on AAU circuit since he was like 13, like getting to play against other top competition since he was like a teenager, getting the exposure, modern training, things like that. So it's truly something where like we can like speculate all the time. Like, okay, what if we, like, what if this player got to grow up in this era? Like Michael Jordan's always the example I go to. It's like Michael Jordan is one of like the best athletes I probably have ever seen on tape. Like, not in real time, obviously, but like when I watch the tape, like, this is like absurd what he's doing athletically. And I don't think people like. I think people know he's athletic, but I don't think people understand to the extent like this is like Superman out there.
Yeah.
But what if he like had like those same like genetics as an athlete, but also got to grow up with, you know, you get like specialized Gatorade like the moment you start playing AAU basketball. You get like certain training. You learn more to play for the 3-ball, things like that. Like, what if somebody that had like the same like intangibles and the wiring as a player as like Michael Jordan, like what if he got to grow up with like these kind of advantages? Like, how crazy could he have been? But at the same time, it's also like, at the same time, I also feel like with LeBron as an example, it's like maybe these guys who just like they're era defying players, like they can play any era. I don't know if Rashard Lewis is that necessarily, but you know, it's something that always comes back to, and I say this all on my videos, like, it's something only, like, time will tell if it's possible, and if it's not possible, we can only speculate. So, I think that's what makes it fun, though. Like, being able to speculate about, like, okay, what would he be if he played now? And what would any player that played back then that was really good, what would they be now under the certain context that we have now?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Agree with you there, and that's like a whole different thing where it's like you're talking about, because I mean nowadays, like, and so that's like, but the thing is, like, so these like pioneers, these trailblazers, right, that's like the beauty of them is like they're like Rashard's kind of like his best and worst enemy when we're talking about like his overall standing in the pantheons of everything, right? Because like he's his best, he's like, you know, it's great that he was so being ahead of his time, like helped him gain a competitive advantage against his peers, right? Which is probably the thing that matters most to him, you know, was winning basketball games when he was playing basketball. But, like, at the same time, like, because, like, he gave us this blueprint, like, we'll talk about this later, but, like, I think the cool thing about Rashard, I think the biggest thing about Rashard that I think, honestly, personally, last year I didn't properly appreciate is he's, like, one of the guys who made us realize it's not enough to just be a shooter. You know what I mean? You need to be able to counter when they try to run you off the line. Yeah. Right, you need to be able to put the ball on the floor, you need to be able to attack, you need to be able to get in that mid-range shot, you need to be able to get to the basket, et cetera, right? And so, like, because he made us realize that, now you got all these guys who can put the ball on the floor, attack, closeouts. Think of, like, Quentin Grimes. Think of, you know, the guy I was comparing Rashard Lewis to on Twitter, Trey Murphy the third.
Oh, he's excellent at attacking closeouts.
You know, the Trey Murphys, the Quentin Grimes, like, all these guys. It's like, it's a thing now. It's kind of like a requisite thing. Like, you have to have some sort of count. You can't just be Jason Capono anymore or Steve Novak, where it's like all you do is spot up shoot.
Ryan all Anderson you do is to an extent.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I love about Rashard. It wasn't just like, yes, like when you say yes, he would thrive in modern basketball because he was like a big, like 6'10" guys weren't taking like 6-7 threes a game. Like power forwards and wings weren't taking like that many threes back then, unless you were Antoine Walker and you did whatever you want. But
those are pull-up threes too. Yeah. These are catch and shoot threes. Rashard's taking.
Yeah, like and like Antoine Walker's a player I want to talk about eventually, and I don't want to get too much into it. But I think Rashard, it was one. Yes, it was about the 3-point shooting. It was also about his versatility, and I think that versatility of having a 6'10" guy that you could play at the 2 and the 3, like that's what modern basketball is. Where I feel like we're trending now towards like guys, you play the guys that fit the skill set, not the height. Where it's just like you'll see like a 6'10" shooting guard and like a 6'5" power forward in the same lineup. And that's what I think, like, when I think of Rashard was, you know, like, yes, he's 6'10", but, like, he's a wing. You play him, you can play him in the backcourt a little bit. Like, and that's just something that reminds me so much of how the game's played now. But do you have a favorite game of Rashard Lewis in particular that you really liked?
So yeah, there's like one that stands out in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I'll like caveat this. I wasn't like some crazy Rashard Lewis, kid as a fan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a fan as a kid.
Yeah.
I did watch him play. He coincided with like the
Mm-hmm.
early years of my basketball viewing. But I'd probably say that game one, the 2009 Eastern Conference Finals, he hits that go-ahead 3-point shot. What I actually was just watching it this morning. I really liked how like he drove the ball. It was very modern of him. He drove the
Mm-hmm.
ball, kicked it out, and then relocated for three and got it. And he hit it over Anderson Varejão's head, I believe. I think in that game he had 22 points on
Mm-hmm.
13 shots. It was a very efficient game. He had just a really good series. He gave Cleveland like so many fits because they would try to play. Cleveland, was like most teams during that time. They played like a double big traditional lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Jonas Ilgauskas, Anderson Varejão, Ben Wallace, and like all those guys just turned out to be too slow for him. But the thing is, they didn't have like a big mobile wing that could kind of counteract him. So they would try to put like guards on him, like Delonte West or Mo Williams, and it's just like, oh, cool, I'll just shoot over the top of you. And it's like it goes back to like what you were saying with the wing forward, whatever thing, guard, where it's like this guy, he grows up like he's 6'1", 6'2". He loved Tracy McGrady. He loved the idea of bucket getting, right, and then he's like he grows. So he grows. He has all these skills, and now he's like the bucket getting spacer, which is just like. It was just such an abnormality at the time. Like teams just didn't have the personnel to kind of counteract that thing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, like the idea of like he's too big for the guys that probably won't handle his quickness to like deal with. Like he's just too big for them, and he's too fast. He's too fast and quick for the guys that can handle his height. That's something that's fun because like he had some good years in Orlando, and that kind of that was kind of my whole thing of like why I was like pounding to like Paulo's the best player in the upcoming draft when he was coming out was like he's too big for like those guys that are going to be able to handle his quickness, and he's too quick for the guys that are going to be able to handle his physicality. Like there's like 2 or 3 guys in the league that could handle like that kind of combination, and I feel the same way like you said, like watching Rashard in that Cleveland series was like it's like the ultimate like mismatch. Like what are you gonna do about this? And I think that's what like when you look at like draft processing now, that's what teams look for in their wings and their forward. It's like how do you create that mismatch? Like how do you make it so like the only guys that like Bam Adebayo is like the only guy in the league that can like match up with you, basically.
It's funny you mentioned that because that's who I was thinking about in my head. Sidebar: imagine for this Rashard Lewis. We take Rashard Lewis and put him on this Orlando Magic team.
Yeah.
He could play like the 2. Just imagine how crazy that would be. All the length on the floor. He'd actually give them some shooting, which would be nice. But yeah, he's like, honestly, he's just the perfect. I know this is like it's a ugly word to some people, but he's like the perfect role player, man.
Yeah, and
it was just. Yeah.
I think role player. I think people don't understand like
supercharged.
Yeah,
role player.
like role player. It's not a bad thing. Like I always say this. I'm like, there are only like what 12. There are only 24 All-Star spots a year, and there are only 15 All-NBA spots a year. There are a lot more than 15 to 24 players in the NBA. So, like role players matter. Like, and I think Rashard would be a star in today's NBA because, like, I was watching his tape, man. Like, comparing him to some of the guys that I like to compare him to, I think those guys have star upside. But, supercharged role player, that's not a bad thing. Like, that's
an awesome thing.
Yeah, that's what championship teams are built off of. And that's why, like, you go have like, this is kind of like I think like the trade that Boston made makes them a better team, but like it sucks. Like Marcus Smart was like that supercharged role player that was kind of important. Like Derek White, that's an important piece to have. And like I think fans, like some fans only view the game in like the lens of like the stars and the not stars. When the game is about so much more than that. But
there's guys and there's the regular guys,
And if it was as easy as just a team with like having stars, the Suns would be the favorites to win the title next year. But like rightfully so, that probably isn't the case. Like, you
and
need
that's
guys around those guys, so.
And that's why, like, this is an aside, but we might as well just say it since you mentioned the Suns. I'm really excited to watch them play this year.
Yeah, I am
I think it's going to be very fun. But I do think it's, like, funny to me. Like, people are like, man, that guy Mat Issa really knows what he's doing, all this and that, bringing in. I'm like, I think he might, like, be over fetishizing, like, star players. Like, he just has, like, big eyes for, like, big names, you know? That doesn't make you smart.
And I mean, I say I think Beal makes him better, obviously, and I say it's someone that loves Bradley Beal. Like, I think he's one of the most disrespected players of his generation.
Agreed.
Like, people act like he's just he's never had an impact on winning basketball. Like, he's made the playoffs like 5 times in his career, and he's a relatively good playoff performer. But we could say, like, I feel like any team we talk about, we could just say, oh, put Rashard Lewis on this team. Like, and that would be crazy. And that's the thing. It's like he fits everything. And that's what, like, I'm not comparing him as prospects. And I'm not saying that Jet Howard, this player, will reach themselves. But, like, that's what I thought about with Jet Howard. Like, man, this guy just fits, like, any team. And I feel the same way about Brandon Miller as well. It's like, these guys just fit. Like, any team could use this.
Oh yeah, and they don't. That's the cool thing about Rashard. Is like he has. It's like funny because, like, you know, there's a lot of guys who don't take anything off the table. You know, a lot of guys like the spacers we talked about don't take anything off the table. But the cool thing is, like, if he wanted to, he could take some stuff off the table. You know what I mean? Like, he could get his own shot. But it's just like, I don't know. He just, for some reason, that's another thing we're not really talking about. The way he was wired. Like, just to be able to sacrifice himself kind of in that way, because he probably could have averaged like 5-7 points more per game, like in a given season if you wanted more on-ball touches. But just the way he was able to sacrifice, kind of play off of Hito, play off of Jameer Nelson, be like the third guy in all those little pick and roll actions they had going on in Orlando. Like, that's a huge thing too. And then, like, just having that in your back pocket, having the bag getter. Bucket getter, whatever, in your back pocket. It was just, literally any team in the NBA today would be very happy to have him.
And I think we kind of touched a bit on both of these things earlier, but, like, one, his impact on modern basketball, like, you know, like, I don't think it's as big as what KD did. Because I think KD had one of the biggest impacts, like, we've seen on basketball, where it's just, like, KD to me was always the guy who was just like, KD took, like, kind of like made, like, the whole concept of being tall, being good for your height at certain skills. Like, he made it absolutely, like, dude, no, you're just good at that skill now. Like, there's like you're not a good shooter for a big. You're just a good shooter. You don't have a good handle for, like, a power forward. You just have a good handle. Like, he kind of, like, changed that. But I think Rashard had a big impact on modern basketball as well, and I think that KD, like, is kind of a product of Rashard in a way, where, you know, like another one of those, like, tall forward wings, definitely better than Rashard. I don't think anyone's gonna argue that, but
no, I'm gonna argue it.
But, you know, like, I think Rashard, like, a lot of what you see now, like, that was Rashard before that became, like, is mainstream the word for it? Like, like, you know, tall wings, tall guards.
To simplify it for people, it's basically Rashard is the platonic ideal for role players who are not big men on offense.
Yeah.
This is exactly what you want from a role player on offense who is not a big man. You want them to be like Rashard Lewis.
Yeah, and I think in today's NBA, I think, like, statistically, he'd be, like, a pretty similar player to what he was.
Yeah, no, I think the stats would all, like, I mean, all the numbers would translate, all that, this and that. I'm just saying, like, just because today's stars are just so much more skilled. Like, I'm trying to think of a great example, but I don't know. I just think we don't have as many, like, one-dimensional players anymore. Yeah. You know, like, I feel like they're just, guys are just so skilled today. You know, like, look at Nas Reed. Look how skilled that guy is. He's not even a top, like, 75 player. You know what I mean?
And it's like Brandon Ingram. is always an example I would use. Like Ingram is absurdly skilled, and he's someone that kind of is like, I would say it's kind of like a byproduct of like what Rashard was. But like he's also like a really good passer on top of what he does as a scorer, and he's consistently putting up like 23 to 25 points and getting like those 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and he's not even consistently making all-star teams. Like that's just how good this league is. And it's like the one thing I always say, like how talented the league was is like I want you to look at like that stretch Damian Lillard had, like right after like LaMarcus and Batum and all those guys left, through like it was like a 3-year stretch where he just didn't make the All-Star team, and he was like one of the 15 best players in basketball.
Yeah,
and it's just how talented the league is. So I don't think he would consistently be like this like multi-time All-Star. I definitely think he would feast in this era. I definitely think like he would definitely have like multiple 50-point games. Like that's like one of the things I always look at. It's like his career high is 45 in his actual career. In today's NBA, it's just like I get to see him with like the spacing and the way the game's played, and especially again like the game's all about mismatches now. I could definitely see him having like multiple 50-point games, but again, 50-point games now they just seem so common, which shouldn't be the case. But
yeah, no, I mean Lillard dropped 71 this year.
Yeah,
and there's like a debate that he's not even a top 10 player in the league. Like I would probably maybe have him in my top 10, but like just like that's what I'm saying. Like you get guys who drop 70. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah. So, and I you had hinted at it earlier, but I really love when you tweeted about it, like right before like we started recording. Rashard Lewis and the Trey Murphy thing, I really love that one. Do you want to expand on it a bit?
Yeah, I think it's okay. So obviously the height, both are like. Here's the one thing, the one rub on Rashard Lewis, and I think it's just because like he's such a big dude, right? That it's kind of hard. But he's not really the kind of guy you want like coming off of a screen, catching and then shooting. Like he's more of like a pure spot up, space out shooter, and that's like very similar to Trey Murphy, just because of the body dimensions. I think they make it's kind of hard to like just run off of a screen when you're that tall, grab the ball, shoot right. Okay, so yeah, they're more like those textbook spacers, spot up guys. Both can put the ball on the floor, attack. Both are like, I mean, this isn't really Orlando Rashard I'm talking about here, but like can get up there, get vertical, at the rim, explode. That's how Trey Murphy's. I mean, he was runner up in the dunk contest this year. I think both of them are like, I wouldn't say they have any like specific like micro skills that pop out to me on defense, but they just like are like they get by just being so long, and using their their hands and their length to kind of bother people. I think Trey, and that's the thing though. I think like I don't think Trey Murphy will ever be an all. As much as I love him and as much as I think he could be like a starter on a championship team, right? I just don't think he'll be an all-star. But I think he's kind of like what Rashard is today's game. Yeah.
And with Trey Murphy in particular, like Trey Murphy to me is like if he ever makes an all-star team, to me it's just going to be one of those cases where he's like he's like the third option on like a team that's like clear-cut best in the league, which I do think is a possibility that he becomes that kind of guy, where it's just like, oh, like maybe they deserve 2 or 3 all-stars because they're just that good. But I agree with that. Like I love Trey Murphy. Trey Murphy's one of my favorite players to watch now.
I love him. I love him.
I love like his shooting form so fun to study because it's like a no dap, like really hard to get a contest on. But a player that I always say this, I'm like, if you're gonna I'm like stop comparing these wings to Kevin Durant. Like, so my thing is like I'm not always saying oh because like Rashard Lewis is like this common player, but I always say it's like if you want to like realistically compare like a wing prospect to like a starter, like I almost like just go to like Rashard Lewis, like start there. Like I think Rashard Lewis is like a high outcome for for most prospects, obviously. But
to
like,
me and you, he is.
Yeah.
But like I hate the word, but like people who just watch casually, right?
Yeah,
it's like Rashard, that's like why guys player. Like me and you.
Yeah.
Exactly, guys like me and you. Like we spend so much time preaching his gospel because like we want people to understand like Rashard Lewis, like being Rashard Lewis is
Mm-hmm.
like it's a great deal. You know what I mean? That's a great deal. If you can find a guy like that, you could
Yeah.
literally build your team however you want. You have a blank canvas of how you want to
Mm-hmm.
build your team out. You know what I mean? Um,
And it's
but
also
yeah,
like, it's a player any team would want.
exactly.
Like, any team would want, and it's like please compare like start there with these wing prospects. Um, and that was the thing with like Brandon Miller for me this draft cycle, where I guess I kind of came off as a bit of a hater, mainly because like I was just very vocal. I'm like he's not better than Scoot. Um, but I still really liked him a lot, and a lot of like what I liked about him is what I like about Rashard Lewis. I'm like he's tall, he can shoot, he's pretty athletic. Needs to improve like as a finisher, obviously. And I think that will improve with that strength. But just a guy that like you look at and say, yes, I want this on my NBA team. Like he brings a skill set that I know translate. I'm like he's tall, he can shoot, he's a good POA defender. I think Miller probably ends up being a better defender than both Trey Murphy and Rashard Lewis, but like the offensive skills I see I think it's similar. It's like, and it's why I love the Rashard Lewis comparison so much. And like it's a high outcome when you really look at it. Like that's still like a multi-year 20+ point per game scorer.
Oh yeah,
And like and it's like it's a respectable outcome. Like he was a really good player. He was on teams that like contended. He was on teams that contended. And you're doing it without comparing him to like Kevin Durant, who's one of like the 15 to 20 best players we've ever seen. Paul George, who's going to be like a first ballot Hall of Famer. Jason Tatum, who's well on his way to a Hall of Fame type career. Like you don't have to compare him to those prospects to those guys unless they are truly that special. If those guys come around, but like for like everyone else, I always look at them like, okay, like find guys like Rashard Lewis, like watch him play, and then you'll see that it's a really good comparison to make. Like not like a 1-to-1, but like okay, he could reach this outcome. Like if Rashard Lewis went like 4th or 5th in the draft and he had the career he did, like nobody's calling him a bust by any stretch of the imagination. Because like again, a really good career. We talked a bit about, and Alex and I did, about like how he kind of compares to like Chris Middleton, who I feel like is like a bit of I don't want to say upgraded version, because they're not like Chris Middleton is smaller.
I'll say.
But like.
Or are you finishing a thought?
Yeah, I some of like the pull-ups, some of like not the pull-up stuff, but like I don't know. I just feel like the same. Like I don't remember exactly what it's been like it's been like a month since we recorded that. But like, what like based off what we were talking about, like Chris Middleton, like what reminds me between those two is the like, oh, like, any team could use this, like thing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it though.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. He's got like another wrinkle. Like, I think Chris Middleton's just, a little bit better about getting to his spots. I don't think he has the vertical pop that Rashard Lewis did. I'll say Chris Middleton's a better pull-up shooter. The one like knock I had on Rashard Lewis when I watched him is I think he dips a lot when he shoots that ball.
Yeah.
And it's like it's okay because he's so tall, but like it messes with the pull-up shot. It's harder to get into that pull-up when you do like that. So I think that's something Chris Middleton has over him. I think Lewis is a little bit taller. Yeah. I haven't looked at like the catch and shoot numbers. I think Lewis is probably a better pure, just like wide open catch and shoot shooter than Chris Middleton. That's an interesting one.
Like Chris Middleton's also like that guy. It's like, okay, you need to take us home, and he can rattle off like 12 points in the final like 5 minutes of a game. I don't know if Rashard Lewis is quite that, but like I do like agree with the idea like, Rashard Lewis. It's not just about he was tall and a really good shooter. It was also about like he did things that like any team could use. And he was like that movable chess piece. It's like, okay, like we can move you in a mismatch. Like you're the mismatch option on like the 3 this night, the 4 this night, sometimes the 4. I remember like watching some tape, and it's just like I'm pretty sure he had like a PED scandal at some point. I'm willing to bet it was because like Stan probably had him playing like the 4 in the era that like Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki. Which it's like understandable, and PEDs are like they aren't that big of it. I think it's like it's not baseball.
I'm in on PEDs.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be honest.
like,
I'm in on it. If you're willing to go that extra mile,
it's not the MLB. Like they don't care, and I don't think they should care in the MLB. Like the only time like I really think it's like the Olympics. It's just like okay, we know there's a difference, but like other than that, it's just like I really don't care. Like. You still got to be good. That's always the thing I come back to with steroids. It's like you can do steroids all you want. You still got to be good at the sport.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is honestly like one of my more toxic takes I have. You know, you could sue me for it if you please, but hey, man, if you're willing, like I said, if you're willing to go that extra mile, that's like if that's how you're wired, by all means, man.
It probably was what he had to do if he had to play the 4, especially in that era. But like the early and mid 2000s was like the golden era of power forwards. Where it's like that's like Chris Webber is a player I always talk about. I'm like Chris Webber, if he played in like any other era, he's like recognized as like a GOAT power forward. He just happened to play in the era with like 3 of the best, 2 or 3 of the best, depending on how you feel about like Tim Duncan and his position. But regardless, I'm like he always just got overshadowed by those guys. But if he played in a different era, it's like oh. Man, this is like the top power forward.
We can talk about this another time.
Yeah,
he's the progenitor. He's the progenitor of the Jokic. Like a lot of the stuff we love about Nikola Jokic.
That's definitely.
Go turn on a 2003 Kings game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely have to have you back on to do something about that. But other names that I think about with Rashard was like Ingram came to mind. Jabari Smith kind of came to mind. Specifically when I was scouting him as a prospect. Where like Jabari Smith Jr. is an interesting case because he had like a similar type of growth to like Rashard, but in a different way. Like, where Rashard got taller, like got bigger physically, like Jabari Smith grew as like a basketball like player. If you watch like his like junior year of high school tape and some of the FIBA stuff, like he did not look like he should have been ranked. By his senior year and by the time he was draft eligible, like he did look like a real deal. So like somewhat similar growth just in a different way of like one grew physically while the other kind of grew from like the intangible side. But I love that comparison of him coming out because like again he was the other one for some reason getting Kevin Durant comps. I'm like stop it. He's not that, but like I'm pretty sure there were more Rashard Lewis comps with Jabari Smith Jr. than with like Miller or other options. But like he kind of reminds me of that in a sense. Like I feel like based off like looking at Rashard's rookie stats, I feel like if he like got the same opportunity Jabari Smith did as a rookie, he probably would put up similar numbers to Jabari Smith as a rookie because it is still an adjustment. But is there any other name that comes to mind? Like outside of like Trey and Ingram and all those guys?
I like the NBA champion Michael Porter Jr. I thought Lauri Markkanen was heading down that path, but then he kind of like leveled up.
He started
leveled up big time. Yeah.
I swear he got. I was watching his tape recently. I swear he got faster. Like.
He might have.
Yeah, like it's one of those things. I swear he got faster. He got more athletic. But so, like,
yes,
I'm really happy. I'm really excited to see what he does this upcoming season with some of the pieces.
Him as well. I just love that team. I like Will Hardy. John Collins is there now. The high-low passing is going to be ridiculous. Another. So one I know. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to his name, but at the time I thought Miles Bridges, not as good of a shooter, but that athleticism, ability to attack closeouts, at the 4, the length. I'm trying to think some other names off the top of my head. I mean, we said Quentin Grimes. Like I see it like similar, like in terms. I think he's
intangibles. I would say like I see some of the same stuff like that. I don't know if intangibles is the right word.
Similar like idea theoretically. Him, but then Lewis was just better shooter, taller.
Yeah. I feel like Mikal when it was in Phoenix kind of was like the same like role. Like you were like a move like specifically like his last year like half season in Phoenix is kind of like we saw the expansion of, and I think he's kind of evolved in Brooklyn. Past that,
I can see that.
Yeah, one I think is like similar role. I think Rashard was probably better. Was Anthony Simons. Like again, like Simons is like I think of like pure like you would love this guy on your team no matter what. Like, any team could use this. Like I feel that way about Simons. Like, but like Simons is a weird player. And this video is going up after I upload a video about Scoop, but I kind of talk about like, oh, like he's really good as a spot up guy, like, really good as a catch and shoot guy, but doesn't necessarily have the counters. Doesn't necessarily have the counters on say that you would have hoped. I don't know if you feel similarly about Rashard. Like, I feel like I think the best way to describe it would be like the way I view Rashard compared to like Chris Middleton's kind of the same way I feel like Simons compared to Scoot, where one just kind of fits a little bit better, but the other's more of a creator in a way. It's a weird. It's a workshop more than like a solidified idea, but like I see like role similarity with Rashard and Simons in terms of pure like how they get their offense in terms of like pure scoring. But not like the mismatch stuff. Simons obviously isn't as big as Rashard. It would be terrifying if he was. That's like, oh. Because I think if Simons was taller, it would make up for some of his lack of counters that he has. But like, similar role. And, you know, I think there are guys like entering the NBA in the next few years that kind of like are, you know, somewhat byproducts of it. Justin Edwards, he's going to be at Kentucky next year, projected to be like a lottery pick. Kind of reminds me of that a bit. Obviously, Brandon Miller in this draft class kind of reminds me of Rashard. Jabari Smith last year. We might just get like I think it might just be a trend. We get like one like Rashard Lewis type like every year in the draft. Which I'm all for it, by the way.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, you mentioned. So I've only watched one full game of him. I don't watch a lot of college basketball. I watched him live, but Jet Howard, in theory, sounds kind of similar to him. Yeah, I think you're right. I think one a year is a nice, healthy amount. Yeah. I mean, it was a great player, so I wouldn't mind getting like reincarnated versions of him. I think it's just like more so like the principles or the idea of like Lewis. Like it's not like so much. All these guys I talk about, like just like the remnants of their game is just like sprinkled throughout the league. That's what makes them special. Like, you know, with Weber, we talked about was like passing. There, you know, that you can see it in Jokic. Or like with Steve Nash, like the big thing I focused on was like the Nash dribble. Like all little guards do that now, where you like cycle around the basket. Yeah. You just keep dribbling and dribbling. So that's like it's like more like it's like, you know, it's like a great director, right? When they have like a movie, and then you could see other directors just taking little pieces from that movie, like throughout the annals of history, things of that nature.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Rashard is one of like many like pioneers in a way that, you know, you're doing a series about. I'm trying to do stuff like that this summer, just talking about players like it's definitely a lot different, but like pioneer, I'm kind of spoiling like a project I'm going to do, but like the impact Brandon Jennings had on paths to the NBA is something I really want to talk about. Yeah. Because I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for what he did in that regard. But I think we had a really good talk about one of the more fun players that more people should know about. That's kind of my goal with this series is guys that people like either range from like don't really know about to like they know are good but don't realize like how intriguing the game's actually are, which is like Chris Middleton to start with, Alex and you with Rashard Lewis, and maybe we'll do something about Chris Webber down the line as well.
Hey man, I'm always game to talk historical basketball.
But yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you about this. I'd love to have you back on. I love doing. I've only done 2, but the 2 I've done I've really enjoyed a lot because it's really fun to hear like a different perspective about players who may think the game a little differently, and that's not a bad thing like at all by any stretch of the imagination. I encourage like talking to people that think the game differently than what you do, obviously, because it's good to have like different opinions and different perspectives. But Matt, do you want to plug anything before we get head out of here?
I just want follow me on Twitter. Find everything. I post most of my work on there at Mat Issa 15 at MAT ISSA 15. But this was like I kind of I agree with everything you said. It was a lot of fun. I always love talking historical hoops. Big fan of what you do, Noah, and YouTube channel and all your different channels, all the range of topics you can talk about. Very cool. I'm glad to call you a friend, man.
Yeah,
thanks for having me on.
Are you going to be in Vegas this upcoming for Summer League? Or no?
Yeah. I should be there from the 9th to the 9th to 11th.
Oh, I'm there from the 7th to the 11th, so I'll probably see you there. So
Okay.
We'll have to make up
we'll run. For
so,
sure, man.
Check out Mat Issa on Twitter. I'll link the article in the description below. Like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.